даже не о тактическом, а об оперативно-тактическом оружии. Американские РСЗО могут запускать
综合国。近年来，美方为维护自身绝对安全和绝对军事优势，在军控和防扩散领域违约退群，陆续退出反导条约、中导条约等军控。
Right now, it is being compared to a civil war. The entire country seems to have turned into a battleground.
The baby food crisis in the United States is growing leaps and bounds with each passing day. The out-of-stock rates for baby formula in the United States spiked to 70% nationally in the previous week.
Petroleum analysis. Patrick, I think the big question every single American is asking right now is how much worse could this potentially get? We heard from JP Morgan. They're saying it could be over $6 by August.
A sweltering heat wave. It's like an oven. I'm like so hot.
Hammering more than half of the U.S., and it's not even Memorial Day yet.
It feels like we're in the dog days of August.
As this weekend melted away, record temperatures.
New Mexico, where thousands of firefighters are battling a colossal wildfire, now the largest in state history. Part of the blaze was caused by spot fires from a prescribed or intentional burn, but it's also fueled by abnormally warm, windy, and dry weather.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Hope you guys are having a great Sunday afternoon. We have a lot to talk about today. Now, before we get into this, if you see a comment on one of your comments that has my avatar and says WhatsApp and a number for you to call, it's an obvious scam. People are still falling for this. And every time I block one of these accounts, 2 or 3 more spring up. They're running out of possibilities in terms of the names that they can use, but they're still coming. So please don't fall for this obvious scam, guys. Now, I also want to say we released a video yesterday that I believe is likely one of our most important videos. It was a collaboration with Dr. Joe and Amy Alton. Guys, you need to know how to do this. You need to know how to stop the bleeding when moments count. This is information that can actually save a life. So please go and watch that video. Now, what often happens with people is they get caught up in this conveyor belt of information, and they avoid doing the practical things, putting in the work that's going to be required, because at the end of the day, what's really going to matter is your skill set and your resourcefulness. Now, the most likely ways that you're going to die in an SHTF scenario are as follows: sanitation issues, waterborne pathogens. You may be physically unfit. This is a major one. You need to make sure that you are physically prepared to endure a shift in the standard of living, which is going to require you to do more manual labor. Okay, you're going to have a lack of medicine. Maybe you get an infection. As simple as that. If you don't have the proper antibiotics or medical care, you're going to die. Okay, another thing is bleeding out. Okay, it's not just about you get shot and that's it. There's something that happens after that to ensure that you're a casualty and not a fatality. Okay, food scarcity. Can you grow your own food? This is going to be our focus in the next month. We're going to have numerous videos about this topic. Are you going to die of exposure? Okay, how do you deal with the heat? How do you deal with the excessive cold? And of course, you may just get your ass hauled off to the gulags like most of us who are putting everything on the line here on YouTube. But let's hope that doesn't happen, because that is going to be a substantial factor. If anything that we've learned in the last few years is that the government's not going anywhere. In fact, they are going to triple their efforts in an attempt to ensure the continuity of government. Now, people want to know my perspective of what is coming next. What is the big picture? Because that's what we do on this channel. We don't really get into the specifics of what is happening on the ground in Ukraine in terms of, you know, the town by town military analysis. Not only am I not as well-versed in that subject matter in terms of analyzing, military tactics and stuff like that, I just don't feel that it's exceptionally relevant to a lot of North American viewers. So a lot of my viewers are more so looking for a big picture overview of what's going on. So that's what I'm going to try to provide you today. Okay, so the gist of it is, what's going to happen in the next few weeks is going to be critical in terms of what the outcome of this war is going to be. Now, here's the big thing, is that the US is going to be sending these multiple launch rocket systems to Ukraine for them to use against the Russians. Now, the threat here from the Russians' perspective is that this is a red line because these rockets can potentially reach ranges up to 500 kilometers depending on the type of ammunition that's going to be used. So from the Russians' perspective, this poses a threat to their cities, to their supply lines in their own country. It enables Ukraine to penetrate deep into Russian territory, as well as potentially start attacking some of these places that they're currently out of artillery range from, like Mariupol, parts of the Donbass that the Russians currently control. Now, this is considered a red line. Okay, this is something that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has reportedly cautioned Western powers against, and that's supplying Ukraine with weapons capable of hitting Russian territory. Such a move would be a serious step towards an unacceptable escalation. Now, we're hearing this talk about how Putin, Macron, and Scholz, the leaders of France and Germany respectively, have had some sort of talks, negotiations around what's going to happen in the next few months. The thing to remember here is that the European countries only have so much power in this whole, in terms of the outcome of this whole ordeal. The people who hold the trump card are the United States. Okay, they are the one of the main belligerents in this whole thing. So regardless of what Germany and France say, and regardless of what Putin discusses with them, at the end of the day, it's going to boil down to, what the elephant in the room decides to do, and that's the United States, because it all rides on that for reasons we're not really going to delve into. But the United States are, France and Germany are not going to do anything that goes against the will of the United States. Now, what you're hearing in the news is that Putin is willing to have peace talks with Zelensky, and that's a massive stretch over what was discussed in this 18-minute phone call. And that should sum it up right there. This was an 18-minute phone call. They're talking about Putin, how Putin is going to open corridors so that Ukrainian ships can get grain out to North African countries and other places around the world that require this grain in order to feed their populations. However, the main caveat here is that Putin has said the only way we're going to do this is if you lift sanctions, okay? And if they were to lift sanctions in order to let these ships worth of grain through, that would essentially be a Russian victory, like a total Russian victory, because not only will they have conquered territory within Ukraine, but they will have also had the sanctions removed. Now, obviously, I don't think the U.S. is going to go for this. As much as we want to believe that we're going to do what's right, no matter what the UN says or the IMF or any of these international bodies that are pushing for this attention to the global food crisis, at the end of the day, none of these key players involved are going to want to give any ground up to Russia. So I just don't see anything coming from this. Now, there is still that line of communication, but like I said, I don't think that, unless there is some, serious pleading with the countries who need to import this food with nations that are, obviously key players in this war, I can't see that, I can't see the Russians being willing to just let those grain ships through for a variety of reasons, okay? Because here's what you need to know is that every time, so long as Zelensky is back and forth, like one day he's saying, you know, okay, we're ready to have peace talks. I want to talk to Putin directly. And the next day he's saying we're not going to give up any territory whatsoever, not even Crimea, which was in Russian control since 2014, which is just a delusional pipe dream that the Russians are ever going to let that go. So long as there's that back and forth, the Russians are never going to trust the West enough to have these corridors, because it will be an opportunity for, in their mind, for Ukraine to resupply, you know, get more weapons, start projecting themselves outwards. And right now, a lot of this boils down to what's going on in Odessa, where a lot of this Ukrainian grain is going to be shipped from. I think there's something like 300 ships that are waiting to exit. Okay, there's a lot of stored grain in silos in Ukraine that hasn't been able to ship to these other countries because of these blockades. The Russians are saying, well, it's because of Ukrainian mines. The Ukrainians are saying, no, it's because of the Russian naval blockade. Now, there is talk that the Russians will want to, at some point, by some way, shape, or form, take the town of Odessa, which, of course, would make Ukraine a rump state and completely block them off from the Black Sea. In such case, I guess it would be up to the Russians solely to coordinate where those ships went. And, you know, and in that case, we're looking at a completely different world geostrategically, I suppose you could say. But I just don't see the situation. I see the situation escalating. For one, Denmark is going to be sending some, what kind of missiles are they? What are they called again? Harpoon missiles. Ukraine has begun receiving Harpoon anti-ship missiles from Denmark and M109 self-propelled grenade launchers from the United States. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov said today, stressing that the weapons will assist in the country's coastal defenses. So what this is going to allow them to do, in conjunction with the other Neptune missiles that they have, is potentially start targeting the Russian naval fleet in the Black Sea. And of course, this is going to be a major escalation. So I think we're at a crossroads right now in that the only real solution that I've heard, and not many people are going to like this, because there's some people who want nothing short of, you know, Russia completely leaving the country, which is just not going to happen, guys. As much as we might want that to be the case and everything goes back to zero and, you know, everybody lives in peace and harmony, that's not going to happen. Forget about it. So the only possible solution that I've heard so far, and this was Gonzalo Lira, he was talking about how one possible outcome is that there's a military coup in Kiev and Zelensky is taken out and the military there makes some sort of arrangement with the Russians whilst saving face with its own population to maintain some level of legitimacy as they depose the current government there for whatever reason. Because the military, as he says, is going to start incurring significant losses they already have in the Donbass. From what we're hearing, you can never really get any straight information, but there appears to be a disjunct between what the Zelensky government is asking of its soldiers and what their capacity to do and to deliver actually is. So the soldiers are wanting to retreat and the government is saying don't retreat, and thus they're getting slaughtered or captured or whatever. Now, that's just one story. I don't know if that's exactly happening, but we need to analyze all the possible angles to this, right? And as such, that's the only real solution I can see, because clearly Zelensky is not willing to give up any ground. But at the same time, it's hard to say, you know, I mean, that guy can flip-flop, you know, from one day to the next. So you just never really know. I think a lot of it's going to come down to Washington. If it's determined that there's too much global instability as a result of this food crisis, which is intensifying, then they may well lift some sanctions so that Russia decides to let some of those grain ships through. However, there's always the possibility of rearmament, and the Ukrainian nationals using that as an opportunity to bolster their defenses and whatnot. Although we don't know the specifics, right? Maybe there's more, they'll draft some agreement which has some sort of military security guarantees in there or something like that. But what I'm saying is, guys, is that this has a drastic potential to escalate in the next couple months as these new weapon systems arrive in the United States. Again, we don't know what type of ammunition is going to be supplied for these multiple launch rocket systems, but this has been deemed a red line for Russia, which may even warrant the preemptive attacking of these supply shipments in places like Poland. Of course, there's still essentially no planes being flown in to Ukraine, as far as I know, but that may be different with diplomats. In fact, actually, let me walk that back. I'm not sure exactly how that's working right now, but it looks like it looks like this thing could really go south in the next few months. But I also get the intuition that maybe things are calming down a little bit. I think that we're going to see a market bump tomorrow, because a lot of people are misinterpreting this phone call between Schultz and Macron and Putin. They're blowing up to something that's bigger than it is, and it's really nothing. It's really meaningless. If anything, it's showing us where the stalemate truly is, and that's that the West is not going to relinquish any sanctions, and Putin is not going to let any grain through, which means global instability is going to persist. So, what else do we got for you guys today? Russians are testing out some Zircon missile systems, which are hypersonic missile systems. They're also going to be outfitting their Sarmat ICBMs, which is the Satan ICBM, which can carry something like 50 megatons of nuclear warheads. Those are going to be equipped with what are they called? Hypersonic warheads with boost glide vehicles, which are going to be maneuverable. These things are going to be impossible to shoot down, and that's one of the main things to consider. And I think the U.S. Navy is a little bit concerned. I think NATO is a bit concerned about these missile systems, which are essentially impossible to defeat. Okay, I mean, missile defense is hard enough as is, but then if you put hypersonic, maneuverable, low-flying missiles, I mean, it's impossible. And then, of course, your naval fleets are sitting ducks. Okay, the Russians are going to be drastically ratcheting up their deployment of Sarmat missile systems throughout the country later in fall. Now, Russia has said their UK envoy, what's his name? The Russian ambassador to Great Britain, Andrei Keelan, said that that Russia has no intention of delivering a nuclear strike on the UK. I mean, they've always said this, right? Because they say it's outside of their nuclear doctrine. Because, of course, their nuclear doctrine essentially requires the country to be at an existential risk of annihilation. But, of course, there's some real broad ambiguity in that. And I think you're never going to hear an ambassador to a country, especially one that is within a country, at that time to say that, we're going to nuke your country. So for me, that's kind of a moot discussion that was had there between, I think it was the BBC who was interviewing him. It was, yes. Now, what else do we got going on here? That's the main thing I wanted to discuss today, guys, the issue with these long-range weapon systems, because at the end of the day, it's going to, the Ukrainians are going to lose the Donbass. It's becoming increasingly clear, even the Western media is acknowledging that. How they regroup and what they do next is the big question. Now, as some of you guys know, there's a guy, former UN weapons inspector. I don't bring his name up much because not enough attention is paid to the fact that he has some previous sex offenses. And it's hard to say whether or not, he was entrapped or framed, because he basically put the whole American government on blast. He was one of the guys who was outspoken against the Iraqi war, and if there was ever someone who, whose opinion held sway in terms of the outcome of that investigation, it would be him, because he was one of the people who was on the ground looking for these WMDs, which of course nobody found. So I don't often reference Scott Ritter, but his perspective of the conflict is kind of changing. Initially, he was like, yeah, the Russians are going to have this major defeat, which is going to be historically revered as one of the greatest military operations in history and the most successful. Now he's kind of changed his tone because he believes that the amount of weapons that could potentially be brought to bear by the United States in this $40 billion package, in addition with all of the other military armaments that are going to be supplied by European countries, he thinks that that could potentially change the course of the war once Ukrainians fall back and regroup and resupply in Kiev or wherever the case. He thinks that that could be a potential game changer. People have pushed back and said, no, the majority of this money is not going directly to weapons. It's going to be, the way it's actually being broken down, a lot of the money is not going to make it in the hands of, into the hands of the Ukrainian military. So it's hard to say, but that's something to bear in mind too, is that the Ukrainians will start to receive a lot more weapons because they also have the Lend-Lease deal, which allows them to, above and beyond the 40 billion, basically run up a tab for military equipment. And the problem with this MLRS missile system is, even if you don't believe that's significant, it's a new benchmark. Okay, it's they keep pushing the envelope, and I think the Russians know this. They keep pushing the envelope with what type of weapons they're going to be sending out there. And as such, the next round, they might send even heavier equipment, which of course is going to create even further escalation. Now, what's next? We have this Iranian situation. The Iranians just released a video because the Israelis are still doing this major military exercise, which is a simulation. It's called Chariots of Fire. There's a few other countries that are involved. Cyprus is another one who is going to be getting involved in this, and it's to simulate attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. The Iranians are flexing. They released a video showing one of their many underground World War III bunkers full of these drones. It looks like a reverse engineered Predator drone, because I believe the Iranians brought one of those drones down. They hacked it or something like that. So I'm sure they've, at least to some extent, been able to reverse engineer that. And so they're showing off all their drones in this deep underground military base, we can presume, which may be impenetrable. Although, I don't know anything about the bases themselves, but so it looks as though that situation is still potentially getting hot. We have a situation in the Aegean Islands between Turkey and Greece, and we're potentially seeing Turkey's exit from NATO at some point. And that will be a huge shift in the balance of power. Will Turkey leave NATO as a result of what's going on with Greece, as a result of what's going on with Finland and their application? And of course, Turkey doesn't like the fact that some of the Scandinavian countries support who they view as Kurdish terrorists. And so I don't know much about that situation, but Turkey has always kind of been on the fence with Russia. They wanted F-35s. I believe they were denied, or for whatever reason that deal went through or didn't go through, because they also had S-400 missile systems from Russia. So they thought it would be an unfair balance of power to have the best missile defense and what some people think is a total failure, but arguably still a very advanced and one of the most advanced fighter jet / bombers. I can't remember exactly what they're called, like multi-purpose aircraft or something like that. So we could potentially see, Turkey on the side of the Axis in the not so distant future. Okay, what else do we got here? Yeah, in terms of the economic front, Spain has passed a decree limiting the use of air conditioning in public buildings to conserve energy. We talked about this recently. However, the temperatures have still been going up there in an abnormal way. And as such, the EU, in an attempt to curb their energy consumption, because of course they're not getting the same amount of energy from Russia and they're trying to exit Russian energy altogether. They're saying that you have to, in winter, you can't have it over 19 degrees Celsius. So either way, you're gonna be shivering in the wintertime. It's gonna be a little chilly. And they're saying that they can reduce energy consumption by 7 or 10% by everybody just, not using their air conditioners as much and not using their heaters as much in the winter time. So they're starting to impose these restrictions on this. Now they're saying it's going to cost something crazy like $1 trillion for a plan to ditch Russian oil and gas to reach the targeted 600 gigawatts by 2030. Around 56 gigawatts of new solar PV capacity would be needed to be installed during the following 5 years. I'm assuming they're also going to complement that with nuclear and supplement with wind power and things of that nature. But to be honest, guys, how are you going to do that sort of mass production in the current world we're living in with the types of supply chains that we're seeing? Anytime I hear talk about 2030, I mean, realistically, you're talking 2050 this day and age. We also have a potential crisis in sugar coming. If you noticed in the supercut of this video, we showed a quick blurb of another YouTuber who lives in Russia, who's walking through this grocery store in Russia, and she's showing all the prices of the food there. And I was absolutely astonished. Now you need to understand that they're priced in rubles. So if it says sugar is 129 rubles, that means a bag of sugar is $2 or like $1.50 or something like that, depending on where the ruble is right now. They showed eggs. I think they showed eggs that were like 79 rubles. Now eggs here, I don't know where you guys are, but eggs right now for a dozen eggs varies between $3 to $7. They're paying like just over $1 for eggs. The sunflower oil there, incredibly cheap compared to what we have here. So the prices in Russia, contrary to all the sanctions and everything, are actually very low compared to the United States and Canada. And at the end of the day, that's what keeps people happy, right? So anyway, sugar prices are expected to soar due to the export restrictions imposed by a number of key producing nations, including Kazakhstan and India are a couple, as well as Brazil, because Brazil were canceling sugar exports contracts and shifting production to ethanol in an attempt to take advantage of the higher energy prices. In particular, as both food and energy prices are rising, there is an increased focus on the use of food for production of fuel. So we're going to start to see sugar shortages. France has also limited water usage due to a severe drought, has prompted 24 out of France's 96 departments to impose limits on water usage. The country's Minister of Ecological Transition said on Saturday the restrictions range from simple calls to save water in some areas to a more than 50% reduction in agricultural withdrawals and bans on washing cars, watering gardens, which is crazy if you're a prepper, and filling swimming pools, as well as others. The situation was exacerbated by abnormally hot temperatures in May, which is on track to be the warmest on record. Russia has sent record volumes of oil to India and China. Okay, this is from Zero Hedge, the great Tyler Durden. Zero Hedge is kind of give or take, but they've been getting a little bit better in terms of vetting and ensuring that the information that they're providing is legit. Now, India and China have stepped up purchases and are importing record volumes of Russian crude. Russia had up to 79 million barrels of crude either traveling on tankers or held in floating storage over the past week. Kepler's estimates have shown that it's more than double the 27 million barrels of crude Russia had seaborne in February, just before Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So they're making bank off this whole war. There's a lot of people making a lot of bank off the war. So what are we to do as preppers? Like I said, please go and watch that video with Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy. It's a simple 10-minute video, guys. It's going to show you how to stop the bleeding when seconds count. We're living in a crazy world right now, and it's only going to get crazier. People are losing their minds. This is the collapse of Western civilization. You could see the weakness in all of us. It was the weakness in the police who failed to respond, the cowardice and the weakness in the individual who actually perpetrated the crime. You know, we're just a weak society of sniveling little bitches, to be brutally honest. And because we haven't had any major challenges in our lives, everything, you know, we take offense to. That the slightest little breeze, oh, you know, the water cooler is not working today, or, you know, Netflix isn't working. Well, just wait until a real SHTF situation happens. I was swearing a bit in the last video, and I always get these comments from people, oh, you shouldn't swear, I take great offense to this. Well, guess what? If you take offense to that, just wait to see, you know, what your reaction is going to be when you start to see the blood-drenched chaos that is going to be SHTF. You know, swear words, taking the Lord's name in vain, whatever you want to call it, is going to be the last of your concerns. Okay, so grow up, be an adult. I mean, it's going to be dirty. It's going to be very dirty, and you're going to have to be willing to get dirty. So go and do the hard work. Watch our blue strip videos. Don't just watch videos of me ranting and raving about how bad things are going to get in the future. You need to complement that with actually going and doing the work. This past weekend, we've been rototilling the garden. We've been doing a lot of yard work just to get the garden prepared. And, you know, we're going to take it up a big notch this year. We have a studio here, which is south-facing. So it's going to allow us to grow some actual food inside the studio. So we're going to have some experimental stuff going on. So stay tuned for that, guys. Get out to the range. Go out to the wilderness. Practice your survival skills. Go find some good fishing spots. Go find some good hunting spots. I mean, just get out there, use the gear, test the gear, stay physically fit. That's one of the most important things. The reason why I don't do fitness videos anymore is because they just get no attention whatsoever, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try one more time. And you guys are gonna see how I train. I think it's fairly unique. It's functional fitness. It's not quite like CrossFit or anything like that. It's kind of a hybrid style of training. And it's very important that if you are doing exercise, that you are doing movements that are going to be functional and not just using machines and stuff like that. It's very important that you're exercising your muscles in such a way that that's going to translate into real world activity. All right. So anyways, guys, that's all I got to say today. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Canadian Prepper out.